We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Good morning from Evo. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got a great podcast for you, as we're going to be joined by Carter Elliott today, as he does such great work over at Sleepers Media. I know that he's done a little bit of work with the Field of 68. He's a guy that just does a tremendous job of gauging this great game of basketball in general, and I know that Sleepers Media is doing a great job over on Bleacher Report as well. He's going to be joining me, and we're mainly going to talk Big Ten with them. Towards the back half of the conversation, I'll ask him about a team or two outside the Big Ten that has been knocking his socks off, a team that he does have a little bit of insight on, and a team that he thinks might be able to blossom this season, but mainly going to be taking a look at the Big Ten with him. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you, for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larry CM, the name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And typically I would be doing the news and notes of college basketball from the last 24 hours, but transfer portal is really starting to wear down. Hopefully we do start to get a few more moves within the next few days, what have you, but it does seem like the transfer portal, after we had 2,570 guys enter in, things have very much worn down with that front, so you're going to be getting a lot of two-part chats moving forward, and we're going to be doing a lot more conference previews as well. Probably going to be on a little bit of hiatus this week, but I plan on doing the Big Sky next week. We'll see if we can find a way to do the Big South this week. If not, that's going to be in a week or two from now. During the summer months, you'll probably get about one conference preview a week, and then once we hit the fall months, a little bit closer to 2 a week. So that is a bit of the plan moving forward, and if you're planning on being able to have some funds for sports betting, you want to get Edge Boost. Edge Boost makes sure that bettors are able to access their funds 24/7, 365 in leap years 366, because this is a bunch that they aren't running on credit or anything like that. They are making sure that you're able to access your funds for all gambling-related transactions, and when you go to edgeboost.bet, type in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That gets you a $1 for $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's talk with our good friend Carter Elliott, who does such great work over at Sleepers Media. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X, by the way, at his first and last name, Carter Elliott, with there being 2 T's on the end of Elliott, and then 2 underscores after that. And Carter, it's great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg.
Always great to have you aboard. I know that you and Greg do amazing work over there at Sleepers Media. And Carter, how about if we dive in on a place that is near and dear to us, the Big Ten, as you're out there in the great state of Michigan. I'm a man that was growing up in the great state of Wisconsin. And how do you just take a look at the offseason as a whole for this conference? Because, while maybe Rutgers had a little bit of a less than savory offseason, I just look all across the conference, and I feel like even the teams like Washington and company have been able to have really nice off seasons. And I would say if there's one conference that has been a big winner here in the off season, especially with those coaching hires, it certainly has been, in my opinion, the Big Ten.
It's been quite the off season as a Big Ten fan. You have teams that are, bringing back National Player of the Year candidates like Braden Smith and Purdue, while also using the transfer portal to fill that team with guys like Oscar Clough and getting guys like Omar Mayer from overseas. I just think that you look across the Big Ten, it's been honestly very impressive to see how teams with new coaches like Indiana have, shifted their roster and revamped it. And then you have other coaches like you mentioned with Washington and Danny Sprinkles being one of the major spenders in the portal. It just seems that, whether it's spending money or dipping into the overseas a little bit like Illinois and Brad Underwood have done, I just think you see a lot of rosters that are going to look totally different and honestly, I think improve from what they were last season.
Yep, I agree with you. And I do think that with regards to the Michigan Wolverines as well, that's such an interesting case study to look at as well, because with Michigan, they bring in Dusty May last offseason. I know that some people had their question marks with him, but I feel like he did a really good job of backing up what he was able to do over at Florida Atlantic. And I think that this is a team that can really take off in season number 2, because the big issue that they had last year was that they couldn't protect the ball. Now you bring in a guy in Elliott, who, he's not a great three-point shooter, but he's a guy that know is not going to turn the ball over, and pairing that up with the likes of Yaxel Lendeborg, so many of the guys that they returned from a season ago, I think is really going to be a nice recipe for having success.
Yeah, and as a Michigan State fan, obviously seeing Michigan do all this does hurt me a little bit deep down inside. But you have to be impressed with what Dusty May has done, especially because, history has shown, at least in this NIL transfer portal era, that Michigan basketball hasn't necessarily been the best funded program or the best, I guess, run program for the success that Juwan Howard did have. Of course, he had a lot of downs, but there were some ups at the time when he was during the program. But one of the things that was known was he had trouble necessarily getting kids into school, and then he had trouble, fundraising money. A lot of the money went to Michigan football. But now you're looking at Michigan is a school that they're in the $10 million club. They're in the club that is able to play players. Yaxel Lendeborg is one of the top earners in the transfer portal, a rumored $4 million that were spent for him. And you combine that with guys like Elliott, and one that I'm really intrigued to see what it looks like is Marez Johnson, who they get from Illinois, who is just a 6'9" monster, and I think he has a lot to his game. He's having a really, really good trial period, might make the U19 team for USA. He's been one of the dominant names down there in a list of great centers. So, I think that Michigan basketball is really trending in a good direction off of what I consider a really, successful first year.
Yep, I would say so as well. I think that things are very much on the up and up there, as things are on the up and up. Well, we do have our good friend and Carter Elliott joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. Does great work over at Sleepers Media and just across the Big Ten. I do think that this has been a great offseason for them as well, and it's going to be really interesting to take a look at Iowa not being one of the worst defenses in all of college basketball. I think that that's very fair to say, as they have a complete and utter coaching regime change, as no longer are you going to be seeing our good friend Fran McCaffrey. He's over at Penn, which I'm very curious to see what Penn looks like this season. But Ben McCollum comes on over from Drake. As we know, Drake, slowest team in all of college basketball in terms of possessions per 40 minutes, played really good defense. Just how do you take a look at this Iowa team that is made up of a whole bunch of guys that were playing at the Missouri Valley Conference, and then guys like Alvaro Falguerius, who comes on over after he was a dominator over at Robert Morris. And I think that's just going to be an interesting combination and a style that not a lot of Big Ten teams have seen before.
Yeah, well, one is going to take me, at least personally, a long time to get over watching Iowa without Fran McCaffrey on the sideline. I'm 31 years of age, and he is exactly what Iowa basketball is to me. So it's going to be very, very intriguing not to see him on the sideline. But I think you got to start with, obviously, what Bennett Sturts was able to do at Drake. And for him to come along to Iowa, he's going to be, I think, a certified first-team All-Big Ten player. He's going to be one of the better players in the country. And I was one of the sneaky Big Ten teams to me that I look at the roster, and I'm like, I'm just intrigued by it. Obviously, Ben McCollum's style, he's a really good coach, very slow, but very good defense. I think it's a thing that it could frustrate these Big Ten teams, maybe even the more talented Big Ten teams, playing in a game where you have to value every possession because it is so slow and methodical that it makes you take it to another level to beat a team like that. And, they have Bennett Sturts running the show. Everyone knows what he's going to be. I think Alvaro's very underrated in the stretch game that he can bring. He was very impressive at Robert Morris. And then they have underrated guys coming in. Brendan Hausen, who played at Villanova and then Kansas State last season, is just a certified sniper. He's my nominee for Heat Check Player of the Year. He could either hit 9 threes a game or maybe hit 0, but he's going to get them up, and they're going to be deep and tough and contested. But you pair that next to a player like Bennett Sturts, it's a very underrated roster, and what I think could be a pretty sneaky, successful season for Ben McCollum in his first year at Iowa.
Yep, I think so as well. I really do think that with this bunch in Iowa that they're going to be able to take off, have themselves a really nice year in general. And then when I just take a look around the Big Ten, there's a lot of interesting teams. And I think one team that's just starting to go under the radar a little bit is Washington, with the fact that they get Desmond Cloud late. They get back Mr. Yates, who actually began his career over with Washington. So being able to get Wesley Yates back along with Cloud, who played together over at USC, is big. And I just feel like they learned so much from last year, where they paid Great Osabar or nobody else, and now the disbursement of funds just so much better, and I think that it's going to provide a much deeper team than what we saw a season ago.
It's very interesting to see them add Des Claude this late. Now, Des Claude's very talented, but looking at it from a distance, they basically took the backcourt from a USC team that was not good last year and are now trying to replicate that at Washington, hoping that is better. But it's also about what's surrounding the team. And even before they got Des Claude, I love Wesley Yates, the player. I think that he really took a step last year with USC. They have talented freshmen like J.J. Mandequit in the fold. sprinkled as well. They did some other really good things in the portal, which I really like from Danny Sprinkle. And I did think there was more of a disbursement of the money, kind of went to one guy last year. But it's going to be very interesting to see. I think obviously the team has talent, way more talent than it had last season. And, talent can get you to a certain spot. I'm just very interested to see how Coach Sprinkle gets this team to blend, right? Because you have Des Claude, who was very poignant on what he was asking for, the role he wants to play. Wesley Yates left USC seemingly because he wanted to play a different role than playing with Des Claude. Now he's playing back with Des Claude. And then you have all these other guys on the roster who were brought there to do things before they knew Des Claude was in the fold. So I think the talent is there. The roster's there. I'm just very interested to see what Coach Sprinkle does to kind of bring it together, keep everybody happy, make it a successful year too.
Yep, I think that it's going to be a much better year as well. We've seen Danny Sprinkle be able to succeed at multiple schools, so I do think that things are going to be rock solid and on the up and up there. And I want to bring this up with Carter on the flip side, talking about these Big Ten teams that are out west that had a really difficult time with the travel. Meanwhile, the teams that were in the Midwest and the East Coast, they seem to have a little bit of an easier time with it. We're also going to be talking about some of these teams in the Big Ten that are a little bit under the radar, that they could be number 3, number 4 to the likes of Michigan and Purdue at 1 and 2, and we'll get a few of Carter's thoughts on a few teams outside the Big Ten that he feels like might be having a big year. That's up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Great to be rejoined by Carter Elliott, who does such great work over at Sleepers Media, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Follow him on Twitter/X at his first and last name, Carter Elliott, with 2 underscores after that. And we were leaving off talking a little bit about the Big Ten and just some of the teams in general, but how about if we take a look at something more, I guess you'd call it broad, in that the West Coast teams, it just felt like had a very difficult time with regards to the travel going from west to east, as it felt like the teams that were in the Midwest that were on the East Coast, they had a little bit of a easier time when they had to go out west. I think part of it could be because the teams that had to go from east/Midwest to west only had to do so once or twice a year, and the teams that were out there on the West Coast, they had to do so quite a few more times. But want to get your thoughts here and just what we could expect with regards to the travel aspect moving forward.
Yeah, I definitely think it played a role. And then especially because like these teams that are making these trips, like West Coast teams making the trips out there, we're Midwest guys, Greg, but Los Angeles team taking a Midwest trip where they got to go to Piscataway, New Jersey, and then go play in Bloomington, Indiana. It's a little bit of a culture shock. It's a little bit different. The time change, the weather change, most certainly is definitely something. And then also you see when you're on these trips, basically they're trying to plug in 2 Midwest games in that time span. So let's say something goes wrong in that first game, guys are down. There's not really time to make changes. You're traveling again to go back to that spot, and then you have the impending travel back to play at home. It's a lot. I do think there will be some adjustments in year 2 to that. And also, I think that the West Coast coaches found a way. Now, I'm not saying it's not a factor, but, you're trying to find reasons why your team didn't necessarily play well. It's easy to kind of lean back on the travel took a toll on the team.
Oh, yeah. We heard Mick Cronin very, very much in the media.
Yeah, we did.
He was very much there like, the travel this, the travel that, not looking himself in the mirror, to say the least. So I get what you're putting down there, as Carter Elliott, who does such great work over at Sleepers Media, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think that's very obvious when it comes to the Big Ten. Right now, that team that looks really poised to be able to have a big season as Purdue. I mentioned Michigan as well, but outside of Michigan and Purdue, is there 1 or 2 teams that you take a look at and maybe they aren't going to be number 1 in the Big Ten, but you think that they're going to have a big season and you think that perhaps they could be a team that slides into that number 3 or number 4 spot?
Yeah, so the one I'm actually taking the longest look at here actually is, now that you gave me kind of a segue there, is Mick Cronin and UCLA. I thought the big thing last year was I just wasn't a believer in the guards, right? Like, I just wasn't that, Dylan Andrews took a step back. Sebastian Mack took a step back. Insert what I think is the second best point guard in the country, in my opinion, behind Braden Smith and Donovan Dent into the fold for UCLA. They returned Tyler Bilodeau. They returned Eric Daly. I like Trent Perry, the freshman. Think he could have a big sophomore season in a bigger role. Sky Clark is back for the team. I kind of love what the UCLA team is doing, bringing back the great pieces that they had with a dynamic, electric point guard in Donovan Dent, who automatically improves the guard play that I thought lacked a lot last year. And we know what UCLA teams are going to do defensively, how they're going to compete. They're going to make it sure it's done a certain way. But I just think surrounding Donovan Dent, who is such a star, in my opinion, with these very productive but also like underappreciated guys. Like Tyler Bilodeau was an all Big Ten guy last year. Eric Daly, had the injury thing, but when he was playing, he was just a Swiss Army knife who's like 6'6", 6'8", and can do so much for that team. I just really love UCLA. I feel like they're not speaking about them as much. That's a team that I could see fit into that third spot. And then the more so long one that I'm looking at is, once again, Greg Gard in Wisconsin.
Yes.
I feel like they're going to find themselves there. I mean, they got Jonathan Blackwell back. Nick Boyd, former FAU, former San Diego State guy. I like his game a lot. I'm interested to see him in that system. And I think they got some good returning pieces. And, Big Ten fans know, whether they want to admit it or not, Greg Gard, he's going to find his way in that range. He's going to be competitive. He went, there was a lot of stuff said about him last season, and he ends up turning John Tonji into this All-American, and the team's really, really good. So I think Wisconsin's not being talked about enough either this year. So those are two teams that I could see getting in that 3-4 range.
Yep, with Wisconsin, it's so interesting with them because they just all of a sudden had a little bit of a change in regards to their tempo. And how much are you noticing that in general in the Big Ten, for lack of a better term, a lot of these programs are getting with the program? Because over the last 2 to 3 years, the Big Ten, when utilized as a conference, the transfer portal too much, they really utilized it this offseason. Obviously, you've got some fresh blood coming in with regards to coaches as well. But I've noticed that just the pace of play for a lot of these teams has picked up a little bit, and it's just very different from what you would see from the Big Ten even just 3 to 4 years ago.
I say this jokingly, but I also mean this seriously and with a little bit of love. Thank God Zach Edey's gone out of the Big Ten, because truthfully, he was a presence that teams just had to identify and play around with that pace, and having to stop a player that size and that talented, obviously being the back-to-back National Player of the Year, the Big Ten just kind of shifted from this big man, plotting low post team, even when Hunter Dickinson was at Michigan. It kind of was what the conference was. And now, I think there's a turning of the guard with just a change of pace of play, and then also just the approach to the game. You see what Dusty May is doing at Michigan. Even guys like Matt Painter, who you would constitute as a guy that is not about spending money, not about using the transfer portal, is one of the big spenders and users of it this season. It's a sign of the times. You got to get with it or get lost, and I think that Big Ten teams are adjusting to that.
Yep, absolutely. I do think that just the Big Ten teams in general have been able to get with it. And I do have to ask you about this team as well, because you were mentioning it. You're a Michigan State guy, and I know that pained you a little bit more to talk about Michigan than what you would have liked earlier on in the podcast. But how do you take a look at this offseason for Michigan State? Because it does still feel like they're a little bit behind in terms of utilizing the transfer portal. I do feel like losing Trey Holloman in the offseason was a pretty big blow for them as well.
Obviously, losing Trey Holloman after the season he had, and kind of how he was like a program guy, right? We were looking forward to his senior year and him being at Michigan State and him finishing his career out here in a spot where a role was very evident for him. We lose Jace Richardson, Jay Nakins, along with some other guys. It was very evident what his role would be. He moves on to NC State for seemingly a bigger payday and a better role, which can't blame the kid for that at all. But, with Michigan State, there was so much that was done last year by Jace Richardson and having an incredible freshman year. The team really came together and kind of out of nowhere won the Big Ten by 3 games, seemingly when no one really saw it coming. And I think that they took more of a slow approach to the portal, had some underrated ads. I really, really love the Caleb Glenn ad, the kid from FAU who started off at Louisville. I think him as a 6'7", kind of 4-3 man that can shoot the ball at a really high level is something that Michigan State needs, a team that very much struggled from 3 last season. But, I think that Tom Izzo, for better or for worse, is doing things his way, and I think he's doubling down on the guys that he has. I think that he's looking for Jeremy Fears to take a step. He's looking for Cohen Carr to take a step. Jackson Kohler is still there as well. And, even looking at some younger guys like Kurt Tang or the freshman coming in, Cam Ward, he's big on player development. He's big on trusting and rewarding his players. And I think that he's more so leaning into, for better or worse, the guys that he has on the roster. Now, remain to be seen whether that's going to be a good good move or not. I obviously have my doubts about it, not, utilizing the transfer portal to a higher extent, but I always lose hair every offseason with comments on the transfer portal. So I'm trying to keep the last bit of it that I have.
Absolutely. I'm one of those guys that I shave and repeat with the way that Wisconsin goes about things as well, because it always feels like with Wisconsin sports teams, they get relatively close to being able to bust through and giving you something good, and then at the last second, it goes down the toilet bowl as well. So I know that feeling as well. And Carter, I know that you're obviously doing a great job looking at the Big Ten, but is there a team or two outside the Big Ten that has really caught your attention here in the offseason and you do think could surprise here this season?
Oh, I mean, obviously you had the big talking points, so I don't want to pick like a top 10 team that, but I'm not going to go too crazy here. You know what? One that's interesting to me that I've seen kind of like dropping a little bit in the preseason rankings is actually Tennessee. Now, obviously, they got Jacoby Gillespie, who I love, Maryland kid. I think he's going to be really good. I think it's underrated. They have Amari Abram in the fold as well, who transfers in. And then, obviously, the big deciding factor for that team is going to be who is Nate Ament. Nate Ament is a top 5 recruit. He could be, Rick Barnes has told him he's going to come in and play him in the Kevin Durant role. Obviously, that's very high praise, but the kid is talented. He's tall, long, skilled, athletic. He has all the tools. If he puts it together, I think Tennessee could be really dangerous. And then another team that I see like a lot preseason 12 range that I'm very intrigued about is Arizona. I think Arizona's freshman class is phenomenal with Braden Burries, Koa Pete, Dwayne Aristote, and then they did a great job of bringing guys back. Jaden Bradley's coming back. Toby Awaka's coming back. They get Krevis back healthy, who Tommy Lloyd himself said would have been the best player on last year's team. I'm very intrigued, and I feel like people aren't talking about Arizona enough. And obviously, maybe it's because some other teams in the Big 12 are making a little bit more of a splash. You have Texas Tech, and you have BYU, of course, who I love. Houston, who is amongst the favorites. But you got to watch out for Arizona. And I think Tommy Lloyd is in that list of young coaches, too, who I think are kind of next up. Like, they just need to get over the hump of, like, making a Final Four and maybe winning the national championship. I think he's in that next group of, like, kind of younger generation great coaches.
Yeah, but I think that Tommy Lloyd has done a rock-solid job as well. We even saw it last year with Arizona. It was a rough start for them, and then they were able to pick it up late. Do you think that losing Mr. Carter Bryant, a little bit tough for Arizona, but I agree with you. I think that they made some good moves, and the best move that this podcast made was reaching out and getting you aboard, Carter, because you're doing such an amazing job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, so if you're trying to find any of my content over at Sleepers Media, we do a lot of our stuff on YouTube, our Sleepers Media YouTube channel. We have daily episodes that come out there, as well as content just keeping you up to date on everything college basketball. And we're currently releasing our NBA draft scouting video. So the NBA draft is coming up next week. So if you're looking for some information on prospects and their game, we did plenty of watching them at the college level. So we kind of break down that over on our YouTube channel. So I highly recommend checking that out leading up to the NBA draft next week.
And Carter is doing such a great job looking at this game of basketball in so many different angles, and obviously being out there in the Midwest does an amazing job looking at the Big Ten. So big thanks to Carter for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter /X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, AB does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. Then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you Wednesday tomorrow. Thank you.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.